The heat of King's Landing pressed heavy that morning, and the Red Keep's walls, thick with secrets, seemed to sweat under the weight of truth. Ned Stark stood in the Tower of the Hand, his hand curled around the hilt of ice, his family's great sword. The letter from Stannis still lay on the table, the ink barely dry, confirming what he already knew. Cersei Lannister's children were not Robert's. He had waited. He had warned her. He had even offered her a chance to flee with her children before Robert returned from the hunt. But Cersei had laughed in his face, confident in her own power, in her brother Jaime's sword, and in the loyalty of the city. Watch. Mercy was his mistake, and now mercy had run out. Varys had whispered that Robert would not survive his wounds. Littlefinger had smirked and offered empty advice laced with hidden knives. Renly urged him to strike first and secure Joffrey before the Lannisters acted. But Ned had been a Stark too long, too rigid, too honorable. Until now. Late in the night, under the pale light of a waning moon, Ned Stark gathered a small group of loyal men, Sir Barristan Selmy, Jory Castle, and a handful of Northmen he trusted. With his life, they moved quickly through the halls of the Red Keep, the silence only broken by the soft echo of boots on stone and the occasional hiss of a drawn blade. Cersei's chambers were guarded, but not enough. They had not expected the wolf to bite. The Queen was awake when they entered. Her golden hair spilled across her shoulders as she rose from her seat, surprised, but not afraid. So, the wolf finally shows his teeth, she said coldly, her green eyes flashing with defiance. Come to beg again, Lord Stark. Ned said nothing, his voice was ice. You were warned. Cersei's lip curled, and you were too weak to do anything about it. Do you think you can stop what's coming? You can't stop Joffrey. I can't stop my father. You can't. The blade flashed in the moonlight. Cersei's words choked in her throat. She staggered backward, a red bloom spreading across her chest. The Queen of the Seven Kingdoms crumpled onto the marble floor, her lifeblood pooling around her. The silence afterward was terrifying. Even ice seemed stunned by what it had just done. Jory moved first, pulling the door shut and locking it from within. Sir Barristan knelt beside Cersei's body, checking for life, though there was none. It's done, he said, voice hollow. Gods help us all. Ned stood frozen. The weight of his action didn't hit until he looked into her. Eyes, still open, still burning with hate, even in death. What had he done? They wrapped the body in a cloak and burned it in secret, claiming she had taken ill and passed in her sleep. The maesters were paid, the servants silenced. But whispers could not be killed so easily. By morning, the Red Keep was buzzing with rumors, poison, suicide, black magic. None guessed the truth, not yet, but it was only a matter of time. Jaime was still on the road, returning from Casterly Rock. Tywin Lannister had not yet moved, still brooding over the insult to his house. Joffrey, crowned only days later, sat on the Iron Throne in shock and silence. A boy who had lost his mother, and never knew why, and Ned. He stood beside the new king, hand clenched in a permanent fist, knowing that peace would not come from this. He had done what he believed was right, but in doing so, he had just opened the gates to a storm greater than anything Westeros had ever known. The wolf had bitten the lion, and the lion's pride would burn the realm to ashes in return. The raven reached Casterly Rock before Jaime did. The news hit Tywin Lannister like a sword to the gut. He didn't scream. He didn't mourn. He didn't even blink. He simply turned away from the fire, jaw clenched tight enough to crack stone, and ordered his men to prepare for war. Cersei was dead, his only daughter murdered in the Red Keep under the watch of the so-called Honorable Ned Stark. And worst of all, they had the audacity to claim it was illness. Illness? Cersei had the strength of 10 men when her blood was up. No, Tywin knew the truth. Ned Stark had finally shed that northern fur and showed himself for what he really was, a butcher hiding behind oaths. He sent a raven to Jaime immediately. Ride for King's Landing. Do not let the wolf slip into his den before your sword tastes justice. Jaime Lannister was halfway down the Gold Road when he got the letter. He didn't even wait for the sun to rise. He rode like fury was chasing him, cutting down anyone who dared block his path. The words on the page burned into his memory. Cersei is dead. The Northman took her life. He hides behind lies and crown. By the time he reached the gates of King's Landing, his eyes were bloodshot, and his knuckles pale from gripping his sword too tight. Inside the Red Keep, chaos had bloomed. Like wildfire, Joffrey, now king, was nothing but a boy wrapped in silk and fear. With Cersei gone, his cruel edge dulled, leaving behind a pale echo of a ruler. He sat the Iron Throne like it might bite him at any moment. Varys whispered into one ear, "Littlefinger," into the other, and Ned stood beside him like a ghost of justice that refused to fade. The court bowed, smiled, and whispered poison when backs were turned, but no one dared speak of what really happened. Cersei's death had changed everything. Sansa wept every day. Arya watched everyone with suspicion, eyes sharper than any blade. And Ned wore the hand's pin like it was forged from guilt. He told himself it had to be done. Cersei's death prevented a civil war. She would have crowned Joffrey with blood and used him as a puppet while murdering Robert's bastards in the shadows. Killing her was justice. It was, wasn't it? But when Jaime stormed into the throne room, soaked in sweat and fury, everything stopped. "You murdered her." Jaime's voice cracked through the hall like thunder. "You goddamn northern dog! You murdered my sister!" Ned didn't reach for his sword. Not yet. He stood his ground, eyes locked with the Kingslayers. She was warned. She was given a choice. She chose defiance. She was my sister. And she plotted treason, lied to the king, bore false heirs, was willing to kill for the throne. "She was a Lannister," Jaime snarled. "You think this ends with her?" Guards began to move in. Ser Barristan stepped between them, hand on his own blade. Littlefinger raised an eyebrow, clearly entertained. Varys drifted into the shadows. And Joffrey trembled like a leaf. Jaime's hand hovered near his sword. "I should kill you where you stand," he said. "You can try," Ned replied, voice low, calm. "But I won't die alone." Jaime's eyes narrowed, not with fear, but with calculation. He wasn't stupid, not here, not now. He turned away with a sneer. "This isn't over, Stark. You've started something you can't finish." Later that night, word spread like wildfire. The Lannisters were calling their banners. The Riverlands were caught in the middle. And Robb Stark, all the way in Winterfell, had just received a raven from his father. "The lion will strike soon. Be ready." The North would answer. The South would burn. The war that Ned had tried to prevent was now roaring to life. And it had all started with a sword stroke that should have ended it all. The wind howled over Winterfell's battlements as Robb Stark stared out across the snow-covered land, the letter from his father clutched tightly in his hand. Grey wind paced behind him, sensing the unease that rippled through his master's body. The words on the page were burned into Robb's mind. "The lion will strike soon. Be ready." It was not just a warning. It was a call to arms. Robb had never held a war council before. He wasn't even a man grown. But in the great hall that night, every noble of the North sat around the long table. Sir Roderick, Great-Jon Umber, Roose Bolton and others, awaiting their young lord's command. "The Lannisters will not wait," Robb said firmly, trying to hide the nervous shake in his voice. "If we sit still, they'll send their armies north and carve our lands apart piece by piece." The Great-Jon slammed his fist down. "Then let them come. The North remembers, and the North doesn't kneel." Roose Bolton's quiet voice cut through the cheer. "We should strike first, swiftly, before they gather their strength." "Father wants us ready, not reckless," Robb replied, though deep down he knew Roose was right. Tywin Lannister would not let Cersei's death go unanswered. War was already coming. The only question was, on whose terms? Back in King's Landing, tension twisted the capital like a blade in the gut. Joffrey had withdrawn into silence. He barely spoke, barely ate. Without Cersei's whispers guiding him, he was a child in a lion's skin. Grand Maester Pycelle had begun spouting nonsense about omens and signs, while Varys slithered in and out of council meetings with that unreadable half-smile. Littlefinger, meanwhile, grew more powerful by the day, his fingers already deep in the city's coffers. And Ned watched it all with growing dread. Killing Cersei had not cleansed the city, it had cracked it open. The gold cloaks had become restless, unsure of where their loyalty lay. Some still served the crown, others whispered of gold flowing from Casterly Rock. There were rumors that Lannister gold was being handed out like sweets among the guards, whispers of assassination, mutiny. Even Sir Barristan could not deny the change in the air. And worst of all, one of Robert's bastards had vanished. The boy, Gendry, had been hiding in the city. Ned had planned to bring him under protection quietly. But now he was gone. Taken or killed, no one knew, and the silence screamed louder than any answer. That same week, 2 bodies were found in Flea Bottom, girls who had once served as wet nurses in the royal nursery. Poisoned. Their deaths weren't random. They were messages. Ned stood in the crypts beneath the Sept of Baelor, alone, Catelyn's latest letter from the Vale in his hand. She was investigating Jon Arryn's death, still convinced Lysa was hiding something deeper. Her messages were getting more desperate. "The Lannisters are watching me," she had written. "If I vanish, know that it was not my doing." He felt the walls closing in. The Lannisters were everywhere. The crown was crumbling in his grasp. And now, even Stannis had gone silent, retreating to Dragonstone without a word, leaving Ned holding a broken realm with no allies left. That night, Arya slipped past the guards and found her father seated at his desk, hunched over maps and letters. She didn't speak, just stood in the doorway, watching him with those wolfish eyes that saw far more than they should. "Did you have to kill her?" she asked, voice quiet but steady. Ned looked up. He wanted to lie, to say no, but he couldn't. "I did what I thought was right," he whispered. "Sometimes justice leaves blood on your hands." Arya nodded slowly. "Then I want to learn how to fight." Ned stared at her, heart heavy. "Why?" "So next time, I can protect the ones I love." He didn't answer, just nodded once and let her stay. By week's end, 2 things happened. The Raven from Winterfell arrived. Robb was marching south. And another Raven, this one blood-stained and bearing the seal of Tywin Lannister, was delivered to the Iron Throne. It contained only one sentence: "The North shall bleed for the lioness you stole from me." The Riverlands burned first. Tywin Lannister's war machine rolled down from the Westerlands with terrifying precision, columns of knights and siege engines tearing through the countryside like fire through dry grass. Villages were put to the torch. Lord Tully's bannermen were slaughtered in their keeps, and every banner that bore the direwolf was marked for death. But Tywin wasn't just sending a message, he was baiting the Starks. At the head of it all rode Sir Gregor Clegane, the mountain that rides, and behind him followed a trail of bodies and ash. No mercy, no survivors, just vengeance written in blood. In the twins, Walder Frey licked his lips as he read the Raven delivered by torchlight. 2 offers lay before him, one from the north, carried by Catelyn Stark herself, and one from the west, sealed with the lion's paw. He loved playing both sides, but this war, this was opportunity. He could smell the rot of a dying kingdom, and old Walder always bet on the side with the most corpses. Robb's army had crossed the neck by then, 20,000 strong, made of lords, farmers and green boys who had never seen a real battlefield. His banner, the grey direwolf, flapped over the rolling hills as he marched toward the Riverlands. His face had hardened since Winterfell. The boy was dying fast. What was left was a Stark who wore his father's honor like a shield and his guilt like armor. Each night he stared into the flames of his campfire, replaying his father's letter. Again and again, "The lion will strike soon. Be ready." But how do you prepare for a monster like Tywin? In King's Landing, things weren't any calmer. Joffrey had become erratic, lashing out at servants and advisors alike. One moment he was silent and brooding, the next screaming that someone must pay for his mother's death. He refused to sit the throne unless armed guards flanked him. More than once he accused Ned openly of poisoning her. Ned endured it in silence, not out of fear, but because the truth no longer mattered. The Lannisters wanted war, and Ned had given them their reason. Behind the scenes, Littlefinger smiled as the realm split open. Gold flowed like water, and chaos gave him everything he needed. Whispers from merchants, promises from lords, and secrets that could buy entire kingdoms. His only concern was how to stay out of the crossfire when the wolves and lions finally tore each other apart. Meanwhile, Varys came to Ned in the dead of night, cloaked in shadow. "You've lit a fire, Lord Stark," he said softly, "and fires in King's Landing tend to burn more than just those who start them." Ned didn't flinch. "The fire was already there. I just stopped pretending it wasn't." Varys tilted his head. "And now the realm teeters. The boy, King, is unstable. His grandfather is marching with an army of vengeance, and your son is bringing his own." "Then let them meet," Ned said. "Let this war end before it kills everything." Varys didn't respond. He simply turned to leave, his final words drifting like smoke. "Wars do not end, Lord Stark. They only change hands." In the early morning, as Ned stood on the Red Keep's battlements, he saw the first of the gold banners on the horizon. Tywin's scouts, already reaching the fields north of the capital. He turned to Sir Barristan. "We may not survive this." "Old friend," Barristan gave a grim smile, "then let us make our deaths matter." Back in the north, Robb had reached the twins, and Walder Frey was waiting. "Marriage," the old man rasped, with a smile that curled like spoiled milk. "You want my bridge, you give me a bride." Catelyn's face paled, but Robb only nodded. "Done. One of your daughters." Old Walder cackled. "You'll regret it." Robb's eyes were steel. "Not as much as the Lannisters will regret crossing us." That night, as the northern army crossed the bridge, a horn blew in the distance. Scouts rushed back to camp. The Lannisters were on the move. The river had turned red, and winter was no longer coming. It was already here. The battle came at dawn. Robb Stark's army clashed with Tywin Lannister's forces near the banks of the Green Fork, the early mist curling around horse hooves and spear tips like ghosts ready to claim their dead. The clash wasn't just steel against steel, it was youth against ruthlessness, honor against strategy, north against west. Robb had split his forces the night before. A feint led by Rose Bolton meant to engage Tywin directly, while Robb took the bulk of his cavalry to flank Jaime Lannister's camp at Riverrun. It was bold, reckless even, but Robb knew he couldn't win through brute strength alone. The North didn't have gold, it didn't have dragons. All it had was him. And wolves fought best when underestimated. At the Green Fork, Roose did what he did best, fought with cold efficiency, sacrificing men like pieces on a board. Bolton banners, soaked in blood, littered the field by midday. But Tywin's progress was slowed. He didn't know where Robb was. He only saw a northerner willing to bleed. Meanwhile, near Riverrun, Robb struck like thunder. Jaime Lannister, ever the confident warrior, had grown complacent, believing himself untouchable. The Kingslayer didn't expect Robb to move so quickly or so cleverly. His scouts were overwhelmed, his flanks collapsed, and when the direwolves howled, panic tore through the Lannister ranks. The two commanders met briefly on the field, blades drawn, bloodied, surrounded by chaos. Jaime fought like a lion, fast and furious. Robb fought like the storm he'd been, raised in, raw and unrelenting. And in the end, Robb's sword found Jaime's shoulder, and grey wind tore through a Lannister knight to bring the Kingslayer down. When the dust settled, Jaime Lannister was a prisoner of war. The news raced through Westeros like wildfire. Tywin's wrath was instant. He doubled his forces, ordered the burning of every village that flew a wolf banner, and sent gold to the Reach, the Stormlands, any house that could be bought or bent. But back in King's Landing, the real battle was just beginning. Joffrey was unraveling, the crown weighed heavy on his brow, and without Cersei's guidance, his cruelty became chaos. He had Sansa beaten in court when she begged for her brother's life. He ordered a baker hanged for presenting him with stale bread. He even accused the Maesters of treason for not reviving his mother. Ned watched it all with silent rage. Every promise he had made to Robert, every truth he'd fought to protect, was drowned under the weight of a boy king's madness. He had thought killing Cersei would stop the rot. Instead, it revealed how deep it ran. Varys came to him again, this time not in riddles. "The city will turn on itself, Lord Stark," he said grimly. "The small folk suffer, the nobles scheme, and the king is not fit." "Then crown Stannis," Ned said, his voice low. "He's Robert's rightful heir." Varys shook his head. "Stannis won't save the realm. He'll burn it clean." "Then what do you propose?" A pause. "Then peace, a betrothal, Sansa to Joffrey, Jaime exchanged for hostages. Let the wolves and lions lie down before they tear the world apart." Ned stood. "You ask me to feed my daughter to a monster. I ask you to save thousands of lives," Varys said coldly. "One girl for a kingdom." But Ned was done with compromise. He had bent for Robert, bent for honor, bent to protect the innocent. And now he had nothing left but truth and steel. That same night, Ned sent ravens north. One to Robb, "Do not bend. The war has only begun." Another to Stannis, "Your claim is true, but you must act." And a third, to Renly Baratheon, "If you want the throne, now is your chance." By morning, the streets of King's Landing were filled with whispers. Robb Stark had captured the Kingslayer. And in the shadows, men began to sharpen knives not for war, but for the throne itself. King's Landing was a city of masks, but now even the masks had begun to crack. The moment word reached the capital that Jaime Lannister had been captured, the court split like a dry branch under a sword. Tywin's silence was louder than a war horn. No raven came from Casterly Rock. No message, no threats, just quiet. And everyone knew what that meant. He was preparing something worse than words. Inside the Red Keep, Joffrey raged daily, lashing out at lords and servants alike. He ordered a dozen executions, 3 gold cloaks hanged for insubordination, 2 kitchen boys for treasonous bread, and 1 scepter for praying too loud. His cruelty had become entertainment for the court, a twisted theater of fear. Ned had stopped attending his councils. There was no point. Joffrey sat the throne like a spoiled tyrant child, while Littlefinger smirked behind every whisper and Varys melted in and out of sight, like a ghost. Even Ser Barristan had grown weary. He came to Ned one night, armor half unbuckled, eyes tired. "I swore an oath to protect the king," he said, "but I wonder now, does that mean this king?" Ned didn't answer. He just looked down. At the map sprawled on his table, the map of Westeros, a map already soaked in blood. Outside the walls the city simmered. The small folk starved, while wagons of food were redirected to feed the growing number of guards and soldiers protecting the Red Keep. Tywin's gold had begun to seep into the capital, buying spies, turning guards. Even the city watch was split. Half wore lion pins behind their cloaks. That's when it happened. One evening, under the pretense of royal ceremony, Joffrey summoned Ned Stark to the throne room. The crowd gathered. Sansa was brought in, pale and silent, forced to watch. The council flanked the boy king. Ned, cautious but not afraid, stood before them all, his sword at his side and his honor on his back like a millstone. Joffrey rose from the Iron Throne, voice high and brittle. "Lord Eddard Stark stands accused of treason." And the hall gasped. Littlefinger's eyes sparkled. Sansa screamed, but Ned didn't move, didn't blink. "Treason?" he repeated, voice like distant thunder. "You murdered my mother. You lie about my blood. You seek to put Stannis on the throne," Joffrey screeched. "You are no hand. You are nothing." Ned stepped forward, calm, measured. "Your Grace, I serve the realm, not your tantrums." That was all it took. Joffrey's hand shot out. "Kill him!" The room froze. Even Littlefinger looked shocked. But the gold cloaks moved. Swords were drawn. Men stepped forward. Sir Barristan shouted for calm, but it was too late. Ned reached for his blade, but 10 soldiers rushed in from all sides. He fought. Oh, he fought. Cutting. Down 2, kneeing one in the gut, his blade flashing in the firelight. The hall descended into chaos. Then a blade slashed across his thigh. He staggered. Another hit his arm. He dropped to one knee. Blood pooled beneath him, and still he clutched ice, refusing to kneel to a boy who wore a crown he hadn't earned. Sansa ran to him, sobbing. Varys pulled her back, and Joffrey, red-faced and trembling with rage, screamed, "Put him in the black cells." Ned Stark was dragged out, bleeding, humiliated but not broken. They didn't kill him, not yet. That would come later. For now, Joffrey wanted a trial, a spectacle, a punishment to make the realm tremble. And Littlefinger? He just watched, whispering something to the Queen's cousin Lancel, something about wildfire. But the war outside had already changed. Robb received word of his father's arrest days later. He didn't speak, he didn't cry. He simply tore the Raven Scroll in half and turned to his lords. "We march south," he said, "and we do not stop until the Lion's Den is ashes." The North howled that night, not just for war, but for revenge. The march south was a thunder of hooves and iron. Robb Stark didn't sleep for days. He barely ate. He rode at the head of his army like a ghost, his face carved in stone, eyes locked on a future painted in red. The boy had become a commander, and in his heart a new fire had taken hold. Not just duty, not even justice. This was vengeance. Jaime Lannister, chained and bloodied, rode behind the main host under heavy guard. Every night, Northerners spat at him. Some begged Robb to hang him on the spot, but Robb refused. Jaime was the prize, the key, the bargaining chip, and when he heard that Ned Stark had been thrown into the black cells, his silence became deadly. "Send terms to the crown," Robb told Rose Bolton and Catelyn, "and tell them release my father, or I will send them Jaime's head." But King's Landing had already stopped listening. Inside the capital, fear ruled the Red Keep. Joffrey sat the Iron Throne now with both hands clenched white on its arms, not out of authority, but terror. His nightmares were loud enough for the entire court to hear. He screamed about wolves, about fire, about his mother. Sansa knelt before him daily, begging for mercy, for her father, for her family. But Joffrey enjoyed her tears too much to grant. "Peace. She should watch," he said once. "When he dies, I want her to see it." That sentence spread like rot. The court knew now. The boy king wasn't just unstable. He was cruel without calculation. A dangerous mix, and Tywin was still too far away to keep him on a leash. Littlefinger, ever the opportunist, seized the moment. He began whispering into the ears of restless lords. The king is a child. The realm needs a strong hand. Someone with influence. Someone with gold. Someone like you. He said it to a dozen different men. He only needed one to believe it. Meanwhile, Varys moved through the city like a shadow. He visited Ned Stark once, deep in the dungeons beneath the Red Keep. The air was damp and foul. Ned, bruised and bloodied, sat chained to the wall, but his eyes were clear. "You still believe there's a way out," Ned said, voice hoarse. "I believe in survival," Varys replied quietly. "You may have made the realm bleed, but you still have value. Joffrey won't listen. No, but others will." And then Varys said something Ned hadn't expected. "There are those who would rather see Stannis on the throne, and others who favor Renly." Ned narrowed his eyes. "Renly, he has no claim, yet he has soldiers and charm. Sometimes in this game, that's enough." Ned spat blood onto the floor. "Then the game's already lost." But Varys didn't argue. Elsewhere in the city, tensions had begun to boil over. Food riots broke out in Flea Bottom. The gold cloaks crushed one protest and started two more in the process. Bread was now worth more than silver, and stories whispered through the streets like curses. "The wolves are coming. The boy king is cursed. The queen was murdered, and the gods want blood." And then came the final insult. Joffrey, against the advice of every councillor, ordered a public execution date for Ned Stark. "It will show them my strength," he said. What it really showed was how quickly the crown was losing control. Catelyn, having reached River Run, sent one final plea to King's Landing through Varys. "Release Ned Stark, or your war becomes extinction." She heard no reply, but in the quiet of the night, her messenger returned with a whisper, "Prepare for the worst. The boy king is sharpening the sword himself." And in the north, beyond the neck, wild rumors began to stir. Of a man riding with ghost wolves, of ravens fleeing the wall, of white shadows moving in forests where no men dared tread. Winter wasn't just coming, it had arrived. The day was hot, too hot for autumn. King's Landing stood still, the air thick with tension, the kind that wrapped around your throat like a noose. Bells rang across the city, not in celebration, but as a summons. Crowds gathered in the square before the great sept of Baelor. Nobles in silks, beggars in rags. Everyone came to see the fall of the man who had dared to challenge the crown. Ned Stark was led up the steps in chains. His face was gaunt, blood dried on his jaw, but his eyes remained steady. He had refused the offer to confess, refused to kneel. Even with Sansa weeping beside the Queen's dais, even with Arya hidden among the crowd, dressed as a butcher's. Boy with a dagger tucked into her belt, her knuckles white. The High Septon stood ready with his scroll. Sir Ilyn Payne waited by the block with ice. The great sword stolen from Winterfell now used to kill its own master. Joffrey stepped forward, crown tilted, eyes bright with madness. "Ned Stark, traitor to the realm, has been sentenced to death," he declared, voice far too gleeful for the words he spoke. Varys leaned in. "Your Grace, a confession would ease tensions. The girl, his daughter—" "No," Joffrey snapped. "He dies now." Ned looked at Sansa one last time, then up toward the sky where crows circled. The silence was so thick it seemed even the wind had stopped to listen. And just as Ilyn Payne raised the blade, just as the weight of death crept into Ned's shadow, a horn blew. Not from the city, from outside the gates, and then another and another. Then the ground began to rumble. The Northern Army had arrived. Chaos erupted as shouts rang from the walls. Banners were spotted, grey wolves on white. Robb Stark against. All reason had marched on the capital. The City Watch turned, confused. Gold cloaks looked to one another for orders. The crowd shrieked as the bells were drowned out by horns, by hoofbeats, by war. Joffrey shouted, "Finish it! Kill him!" But it was too late. A crossbow bolt slammed into Sir Ilin's side, and suddenly the steps of the Sept were a battlefield. From the shadows, Arya lunged forward, blade flashing toward Joffrey, but a hand caught her, yanking her back. It was the Hound. He didn't say a word. He simply dragged her into the melee, shielding her from the storm. Robb's men poured through the outer gate. The gold cloaks fractured, half turning on their brothers, the other half fleeing. Littlefinger disappeared. Varys vanished. Sir Barristan drew his blade and cut down 3 men in his path, shouting for the king to retreat. Joffrey, pale and shrieking, was hauled away by his guards. Ned, still chained, staggered toward the chaos, until a familiar face appeared. Jon. Umber the Greatjon, bloodied but grinning. "Your son sends regards," he growled, swinging his axe through Ned's chains. "Where is he?" Ned rasped. And then, through the smoke and screams, Robb Stark rode into the square, grey wind at his side, his sword raised high, red with Lannister blood. Ned and Robb's eyes met, for the first time since Winterfell. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. The city fell into full revolt within hours. By nightfall, the Red Keep was under siege. Joffrey had fled to Maegor's Holdfast. The royal family splintered. The small council vanished like rats from a sinking ship. Sansa was found and brought. To her father, Arya disappeared again, slipping through the chaos, bound for the docks with the Hound at her side. And Ned Stark stood before the Iron Throne once more, not to kneel, but to remove a king. Joffrey was dragged into the hall, kicking and screaming, cursing Robb, threatening to have their heads. But no one listened. Ned looked to Robb. "Do it," Robb said. "End this." Ned stepped forward. He didn't ask for a trial. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just took ice back into his hands. The blade felt cold, but right. And with one clean stroke, the boy king's reign ended. By month's end, the realm was changed. Robb Stark ruled the North and Riverlands as king in the North. Ned refused the Iron Throne. He named Renly Baratheon Lord Protector of the realm, with strict terms. Peace, or the North would march again. Tywin retreated, licked his wounds. Sansa returned home, but never smiled again. Arya was never seen. In the capital again. And ice was returned to Winterfell. The lion roared, but the wolf bit first, and Westeros would never be the same again.